of their lives. Why not lift a living income so people could afford the basics?
It's always a compromise, and compromises mean that some people get more and
Welcome
others
back
get
to
less.
Unicorn
Too
Anatomy, my
simplistic.
fellow
That is not how the world
First of all,
In
thank you for
today's
explaining. Did he mislead Parliament? My view is he did.
It's always somebody else's fault.
Whatever side
All
you're
core
on,
subjects,
Parliamentary
all levels,
democracy,
all
that does
markets.
matter.
the conversation
And this
starts
example
here.
approved.
Let's start with this breaking news.
Politics Live, tomorrow at 12:15 on BBC
Tonight
Two
on The One Show,
and
Anton and
iPlayer.
Giovanni swapped strictly for sunny Sicily.
We meet the stars of electrifying drama The Power, Tony Collette and Ria Zimitrovic.
And Elaine Page reveals what happens when musical theatre royalty teams up with real life villains.
We'll see you at 7.
Now on BBC One, the Tea Time News with Sophie Raworth.
At 6, a survival guide for humanity. The United Nations makes an urgent appeal to try to avert climate disaster. Floods, heat waves, melting glaciers. Scientists say rapid cuts to fossil fuels could still make a difference, but time is running out. The climate time bomb is ticking, says the head of the UN.
Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast.
We'll be bringing you all the details of that report also on the programme tonight. My dear friend, says President Putin as he welcomes China's president to Moscow at the start of a 3-day visit to discuss Beijing's peace plan for Ukraine. A breakthrough at last after 9 months of rail strikes as Network rail workers accept a pay offer. And the hunt in Hampshire for this shark's head, why scientists are appealing to whoever took it to bring it back.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, calls for Fulham's
on BBC
Alexander
London,
Mitrovic to
the
face a lengthy
reappearing
ban
bubbling
after his
pools
red
causing
card for pushing
concern
the
for
referee
residents
during
in
their FA
West
Cup
London,
exit at
close
Manchester
to where
United.
HS2 tunnelling is taking place.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, says humanity is on thin ice and that ice is melting quickly. He has called the UN's major new report on climate change a survival guide for humanity. It sets out the deadly risk from a warming planet, heat waves, flooding, rising sea levels. It warns that by the next decade, the world is likely to miss a key target to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And it says that rapid cuts to carbon emissions now could still make a difference. It calls for the adoption of new technology to remove carbon from the atmosphere and greater use of clean energy. Our climate editor, Justin Rolat, reports. So what about the UK? The government has set ambitious targets to reduce all emissions to zero by 2035. Can it be achieved and how? Here's our science editor, Rebecca Morell. Well, let's go to our climate editor, Justin Rolat, who is in Switzerland, where that report was unveiled today. And what was the reaction? What was the atmosphere like as people heard what it contained? Justin, thank you. After 9 months of severe disruption on Britain's railways because of strike action, there has finally been a major breakthrough. Thousands of signal workers and maintenance staff have accepted a new pay offer from Network Rail. But it won't mean the end to train strikes just yet. The RMT's dispute with train operating companies hasn't been resolved. Our transport correspondent Katie Austin reports. Katie, thank you. The rail operator Avanti West Coast has had its contract extended for a further 6 months. Its current deal had been due to expire at the end of March, but the government decided to renew it, saying Avanti has shown improvement. The firm has previously been heavily criticised over reliability and punctuality. Labour says the decision is a reward for failure. China's president is in Moscow at the start of a 3-day visit to Russia. Xi Jinping has been holding talks with Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin, the first since Russia invaded Ukraine a year ago. The Russian president, who just days ago was accused of war crimes by international prosecutors, said he was looking forward to discussing China's plans to end the war in Ukraine. From Moscow, here's our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg.
Well, those talks between the presidents of Russia and China have been going on for several hours now. We don't know whether what's being discussed will have any effects, any consequences for the war in Ukraine. But what struck me today was how things have turned around. You know, back in Soviet times, under communism, Moscow often referred to Beijing as its younger brother or the younger comrade. Well, in their relationship today, it really is starting to feel as if China is the senior partner here.
Steve Rosenberg, thank you. The time is just after 6:15. Our top story this evening. The most comprehensive assessment yet of the impact of climate change published by UN scientists says humanity is fast running out of time to secure a sustainable future for all. And £6 million a day, the cost of housing asylum seekers in almost 400 hotels across the UK.
Coming up on the BBC News Channel, Carlos Alcaraz returns to world number 1 in tennis after victory at Indian Wells. But contrasting fortunes for one of the game's big names who drops out of the world top 10.
And up high on the London Eye as the famous landmark gets a big spring clean.
It is exactly 20 years ago tonight that this happened. The skyline in Baghdad ablaze in what was called shock and awe. It was the start of the Iraq War, the US and British invasion to rid the country's leader Saddam Hussein of his weapons of mass destruction, weapons that in the end were never found. A month after the invasion, Saddam Hussein's government collapsed. President Bush declared Iraq to be free. But it was the beginning of many years of turbulence and bloodshed for Iraq and the wider region, and led to the rise of the so-called Islamic State. Our international editor Jeremy Bowen is in Mosul in northern Iraq. He reflects on what the invasion meant for Iraq and for the world. And you can see Jeremy Bowen's full report tonight on the news at 10. The Democratic Unionist Party says it will vote against a key part of the government's new deal with Brussels about post-Brexit trade rules. Its leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, said while the Windsor framework represented progress, it didn't deal with some of the fundamental concerns. The framework aims to significantly reduce the number of post-Brexit checks on goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain. It includes the Stormont Brake, a mechanism that gives the Northern Ireland Assembly the power to object to changes to EU rules that apply there. Our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy is in Westminster, so tell us more about their concerns.
Well, after that new deal with the EU was hailed as a success by Rishi Sunak last month, it has been backed by some major business leaders in Northern Ireland, and it's also backed by a majority of politicians in Northern Ireland too. But the DUP was never expected to come out and give its immediate blessing to this, and nor was the party ever expected to make a very quick return to the Stormont government, which has been boycotting over this. Instead,
Emma, thank you. Members of the Royal College of Nursing have voted to accept a new pay offer from the Scottish Government. The union had recommended its members back the deal, which would see a 6.5% increase from April, coupled with a promise of other changes. A narrow majority voted for the proposal, which ends the immediate threat of strike action. The online retail giant Amazon has announced plans to cut another 9,000 jobs to save costs. The firm, which employs 1.5 million people worldwide, said the cuts would fall mainly in areas including cloud computing and advertising. It hasn't specified which countries would be affected, but says positions will be closed in the next few weeks. The firm already axed 8,000 jobs in January. Almost 400 hotels, most of them in England, are being used by the government to house more than 50,000 asylum seekers. Seaside resorts, airports and even retirement villages are among the locations being used as part of a Home Office scheme. It's costing more than £6 million every day. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford reports. Sanford with that report. Now, there is a hunt on in the south of England for a shark's head. It is being led by the TV historian Dan Snow, and it began after this dead shark was washed up on a beach near his home in Hampshire at the weekend. It turns out that the shark is not normally seen in our waters, and now scientists want to study it. But the problem is someone got there first and took its head and tail. Duncan Kennedy reports on the efforts to get it back. If you know where it is, do let us know. Weather now, Chris Fawkes.
Hi Sophie. Well, today it's been pretty cloudy, pretty grey, stormy skies here in western Scotland. This was Argyll and Bute, and so far this month it's been a really wet month. If we take a look at some of the rainfall stats, with low pressures continuing to affect the UK through the rest of this week and into the weekend, we're going to expect further outbreaks of rain. Sophie.
Thank you very much. And that is it from the BBC News at 6. The news, of course, continues here on BBC One. It's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Goodbye.
Thank you. Good evening. Coming up on BBC London. The reappearing bubbling pools causing concern for residents in West London close to where HS2 tunnelling
Behaviour
is
towards
taking place.
referees under the spotlight after red cards for Fulham in the FA Cup.
But obviously more have now since
Questions
appeared,
over the future of Tottenham manager Antonio Conte, his extraordinary outburst, leaving many to ask how much longer he'll be in the job. And gymnastics under the spotlight as well. We'll have more from the campaign for better practices in the sports.
The expansion of ULEZ to the whole of
Also
London
coming up
is
on the
being
show,
debated
from
in the
delivering
House of
parcels
Lords this
to
evening.
collecting
We'll bring you the
trophies, we
latest.
meet the golfers celebrating a big
Plus,
win.
could the humble mushroom help
Still not
save
sunk in,
our
to be honest.
planet?
It's,
We'll explain all.
It's obviously been a
And
goal of mine to actually achieve it. It's it's a dream come true.
yes, a big shout out for more volunteers for the King's coronation and beyond.
Hello there and welcome along to Sports Day. Fulham and their striker Alexander Mitrovic could face further punishment from the FA over behaviour towards referee Chris Kavanagh in their FA Cup quarter-final exit to Manchester United yesterday. Mitrovic was given a red card for pushing him in protest at a penalty awarded against his side, which also saw Willian sent off for handball.
This evening, the expansion of London's ultra-low emission zone to the whole of the capital at the end
many
of
commentators
August
to call
is
for a
being
10-match
debated in the
ban for the
House of
Serb.
Lords.
The
We'll
debate
cross to
around
our political
conduct
editor,
towards
who's in
referees has been a
Westminster in
focal
just
point
a
this
moment.
season